and we've got a really interesting panel on the challenges and pitfalls around SDN. It's worth flagging there's an SD-WAN session tomorrow, so if this is a topic that's of particular interest, then do follow on and come along to that to look at this from more of an SD-WAN perspective as well. There'll probably be a little bit of overlap. As Vanessa mentioned, we'll have a bit of time for Q&A at the end, hopefully. Our panel's reduced by one. Kalik from AT&T sends her profuse apologies. She's unwell and so can't join us, sadly, which is a shame given some of the fantastic work that AT&T have been doing in this space. But you'll hear plenty from them this week and in the market generally. And if you've got any questions for them specifically, then I can take those away afterwards if that's of interest. But without further ado, let me introduce the panel. I'll allow them to introduce themselves, George, Sandor, and Danielle. They'll do a much better job of that than I will. So George, let me hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. George Slozrek, I'm a co-founder and CEO for Epsilon Global Communications. Epsilon is a global communications and connectivity company. We're headquartered in Singapore. We operate network in about 100 sites worldwide now in 26 markets. We've got coverage across North America, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Asia-Pac. Traditionally, Epsilon's roots formed from carrier interconnection. We provided a lot of interconnect services for telcos to exchange voice and data easily. That was our founding product back in 2003. And over the last 16 years, we've evolved into now a fully fledged, global SDN platform, not just focusing on telcos, but also dealing with OTT, cloud, and enterprise requirements and addressing the challenges of how to build an interconnection platform for the future.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah. Sandor.
Thank you. Hi, Sandor Philip from Orixcom. We're based in Dubai. Fairly new to the industry as Orixcom, but the executive team have been involved for plus minus 25 years. We approach SDN from a different angle, I guess. We don't build out our own SDN networks, but we are prolific users of other people's SDN networks. So have vast experience in how that works or doesn't work for us in different markets. And generally, we look at it from an angle of delivering services to our end customers and how that enhances our value proposition.
Good, thank you. Daniel.
Hi, Daniele Mancuso. I'm EVP ICT Engineering at Sparkle. Sparkle is the international arm of the former Telecom Italia, today's team, and it has been a spin-off in 2003 with the mission to develop wholesale and multinational customer business abroad. In my current position, I'm responsible for planning and architecture in engineering of all network functions, from submarine cables up to the new virtual functions that we are deploying these days, as well as of information technology.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've seen the pace of change really accelerate, particularly in the latter part of 2018 around SDN. Can you give us a sense of what are some of the key things from your perspective, some of the key changes that we've seen in the last 6 to 12 months? Daniel, if we can kick off with you.
Yeah, well, that's true. There is an acceleration that we see. Definitely, let's say, few points there. Enterprises are getting smarter. They are aware about the digital transformation and about what they can get from carriers. There is an unstoppable moving to cloud, and there is the need from the enterprise to get consultancy and managed services in this move to the cloud. This is definitely generating an acceleration of the anything on demand and anything as a service. And that's putting a lot of pressure on service providers, carriers, especially on time to market. Feasibilities like in the past for getting a circuits connecting to Microsoft Azure are not accepted anymore. The enterprise needs to move the workload to the cloud now. There is no possibility to delay delivery even of 1 day. So go figure the manual activities that all of us were used to in the past. So this is one factor that is putting pressure for time to market. Another factor is definitely the continuous commoditization of connectivity services. And that's going to put pressure on price that we can offer both to our, let's say, ecosystem of friend carriers as well as on direct to enterprise. So it means that we are getting pressure on our base cost and we need to reduce. If you put together these elements, it comes out that manual operations are not more possible, are not efficient, are not allowing to produce something that can be delivered either to carrier or to enterprise or to small end customers. So the only thing is automation. And how can you get automation if you don't have a programmable infrastructure, underlying infrastructure? And what's SDN if not automation and programmability of our infrastructure? So all this is accelerating in the last 6 months. There are also other inner elements that needs to be considered. If you think to our ops guys, the guys that are working in the network part, they are influenced by people working in the data center. Sysadmins that from the advent of virtualization are used to treat infrastructure as something that you cannot touch anymore, something really virtualized. And today this is getting a further pace when you think about infrastructure as a code. So basically in the data center today, everything from the instantiation of a totally new service until the delivery is totally managed by code in a matter of hours, probably, from the conceiving of the service until the delivery, at least to beta. And if you think that a service like this, it's a composable pieces of IT workloads and network, there is no possibility that network will arrive 1 week after the delivery of the code. So all this is pushing towards an acceleration of implementing intelligent pieces of software that are helping us to automate and to make our infrastructure programmable.
That's helpful, thanks. That's a great summary. Shandor, your thoughts?
Yeah, from our perspective, definitely the SDN network providers have grown their footprint, which is great. So we have far more on-ramps and data centers connected to SDN networks. So we're able to get a much bigger footprint. And for smaller operators like us, that makes us able to operate in a global market, which we wouldn't have traditionally been able to operate in without the SDN platforms. So from that perspective, that's definitely ramped up in the latter half of 2018. I totally agree. Enterprise cloud adoption has changed the way enterprises both think about connectivity and the way they consume it. And definitely, as we all know, driven up the demand for direct connectivity with almost immediate access, which helps us drive as a business in that direction. The SDN platforms give us the ability to both be competitive from a commercial point of view, as well as deliver really just-in-time connectivity without having to invest in infrastructure globally to provide a global service. The other area where we've seen a lot of progress, I guess, is the traditional SDN software players and the older hardware players are working a lot closer together. And I don't want to use the term open because I don't think any of them are truly open to anything, but they're becoming more flexible in what they will allow software to run on the hardware and the hardware vendors which software they'll work with, which is ultimately good for everybody.
Yeah, totally agree. George?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's been well covered, and I completely agree with it. What we see in our daily world, I mean, we ourselves are probably in year 3 of Infinity, of the SDN. The difference of a customer dialogue now about the possibilities of Infinity, the realities, the maturity versus what it was even 12 months ago has come on tremendously.
Yeah,
today, it's the front and center of the conversation. How are we going to get, a platform SDN into our partnership, into our collaboration? Let's say, how do we keep up with the pace of the cloud? That's being said, and we see so many use cases, and it's hard to imagine that people are planning today for cars driving down the motorway, streaming 4K, HD on 20 cameras surrounding the car, controlled by the cloud of an insurance company doing real-time monitoring. I mean, that's where we're going. Yeah. And how do you build an architecture that supports that kind of scale? So that's the opportunity, for SDN companies, and I think people are getting prepared for that tsunami. I think, but of course many challenges on the way to get there. So yeah, I think summarily, I think it's the cloud is driving the push and the need to reimagine and re-architect the way we connect and we build network architecture.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've touched on some of those challenges there. So Daniel, you've mentioned the cost-based challenge, and the challenge of the cloud. Sandor, you've mentioned certainly from a kind of a buy-side perspective, the aggressive rollout of SDN and the wider geographic availability of it, which is key. And George, you've mentioned your journey and the huge opportunity. What are some of the other challenges that you see? Because they're quite common across different operators. What are some of the other things that you're seeing that are a challenge either to your organization or the market right now?
Well, I start. Well, for sure there is the need of a change of mindset of people working for technical departments. There is the need to change organizational structures around it. When I arrived in charge in Sparkle of the network engineering department, there was a full silos organization. Engineering of the network, operation of the network, IT engineering, operations engineering. 4 silos completely separated, of course collaborating each other, but responding to different priorities, different objectives. When you move from a traditional hardware-based architecture, both on IT and network, that barriers needs to come down. If you are familiar with the MarTech laws, this is funny because it says that technology grows up at an exponential rate while organizations, especially in telco service provider, are, let's say, if we want to be polite, we can say they change at a linear rate, but in reality is logarithmic. So evolution of the technology is not followed by a proper and sane evolution of the organizations. Silos are one of the biggest barriers to the adoption of SDN, because when you move from, let's say, hardware-based world to a software-based world, when you decouple the operating system and the control plane from the underlying hardware resource, then you need to start thinking to the integration, which is something that basically nobody was thinking in the service provider before. In the past, you were purchasing a router from Juniper, Cisco. You didn't need to integrate anything. You just power on, push the configuration, that's it, the router is working. Today, you can simply buy white boxes that are having just a forwarding plane inside, but you can install each kind of operating system, each kind of control plane. You don't need to install in the white box. You can install the control plane thousands of kilometers distance. So you need to think about also the reliability of the link between the control plane and that specific white box. You need to think about the latency. So you need to engineer the SDN ecosystem inside your network. And that's a great move to people that were used to collect requirements for a specific software or operate boxes, or the maximum that they did was to write small pieces of code for an OSS or a BSS. It's a complete change of mindset, and that's one of the main challenges that we have. And I think it's common to all of us.
And Daniel, I think it is. I mean, it's a change of mindset. It's also a massive change of skill set. How are you doing in terms of getting the talent? Because historically, we've had, to your point, hardware engineers, we've had software engineers. Now we need a blend, and we need people who can integrate one to the other, to your other point. How's Sparkle doing attracting that talent and finding that talent and growing that talent in the market?
Well, the first thing that you need to do, if you don't have, is to build a lab.
Okay.
A lab on which empower teams that do not respond neither to engineering nor to operation, nor to any other organization, needs to work there and understand what they are doing, understand the world from which they are starting, and understand where they want to head up. Of course, you need to collect some skills from outside, universities, young network engineers that are having in their career of study some coding experience. Because basically today you need to mix skills between network and IT. We have created the role that we like to call network software engineer. You need to put side by side to these guys that are more, let's say, low-level programmer, that are scripting part of codes that are applied to SDN controllers, to orchestrators, and really to white boxes. You need to put side by side to them a group of software experts that will approach the OSS, BSS part with a totally different perspective than the standard buy a product, integrate in your architecture, and run away. We still need the system integrators, but we need to create the first layer of integration, but then we need to empower these new skills to be the future programmers of the network and of the IT architecture.
Okay, so that's good. So you've built a laboratory, you've built a lab, you're giving people the freedom to play in that lab, and you've created some new roles around the network software engineer.
Absolutely.
Title. Okay, that's interesting. And Sándor, how are you finding things in the Middle East? Obviously, you've got a particular knowledge of the market here. How's attracting that talent, and what are some of the other issues that you see in the market here specifically?
Sure. I mean, I think it's fair to say that in the Middle East, we're not always cutting edge, but if you look at technologies like cloud and SDN and definitely SD-WAN, the adoption rate is far quicker than older traditional technologies. So while we're still not on par with the US, Europe, and Asia, the gap is closing. So the availability of skills and resources is there, but we're able to also leverage partnerships. Right, so leverage SDN network providers, leverage partnerships with white box vendors, leverage partnerships with software providers. I guess some of the challenges we face today across our services is we don't deal with just one network provider. So we have multiple SDN providers, and while it's called SDN and on-demand and flexible, everyone has their own way of implementing it. The underlying connectivity is different. Some are SDH, some are fiber, some are traditional MPLS. So it does become a challenge making sure when you're building an end-to-end service across maybe multiple networks, how that all integrates and gives a consistent service end-to-end. The other challenge we face is, while everything is API-driven, which is great, of course, not all entities can afford to become development houses. And let's say we work with 3 vendors, and those vendors make one change to the API every quarter. We have multiple changes that need to be made on our side just to create an integrated platform. So I think there's a lot of work that can still be done to create some standards around maybe a standard API that covers 80% of functionality versus having an API that covers 100%, but we don't need all those features.
And that maybe will arrive in a 3 years time frame when it's too late.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely, but a lot of work's been done on standardization, hasn't it? And George, I'm sure you've got a perspective on that, because I know Epsilon's been very engaged in that activity. MEF have obviously been hugely influential. AT&T, if they were here, would talk a lot about it, obviously. What are your perspectives on the standardization challenge? Again, lots of progress last year, but a lot of work to do on that.
Yeah, okay, so we are coming from a early background, because we like I say, we started out in 2015-16 with the ideas, concepts for SDN, since it was critical to our whole evolution as a company to be a next generation interconnect company. So we've done a lot of standards internally, bespoke APIs for us. And we've been learning from some of our customers who are also right up the API stack, mainly coming from the CPaaS sector. We found those companies to be very pioneering. If you look at the work Twilio's done and how successful it's been, I mean, essentially, it's taken a voice minutes business, right, which we might laugh at, and they've transformed it into be an incredible, powerhouse of CPaaS communication, build contact center in the cloud, essentially still driving minutes and SMS. And what was the great secret sauce for them was their business agility, their APIs, how they interconnect with their partners, who the market they were selling to. They weren't selling to end users. They were selling to DevOps people. And so we took our inspiration there, and so we started down that path. So for us, today, Infinity is still a myriad of internal bespoke APIs, and we can move quickly because they are our own. We are very active on the MEF, as a user of MEF products.
Yeah.
We have enjoyed the standards of our carrier Ethernet for many years, and that's actually proven tremendous dividends because we've got standard SLAs and got great reliability. Whereas if you connect, sort of look at the whole myriad of VPLS and other services that are perhaps not standards based, you get a better quality of experience, in my view.
Definitely.
And we are following that standards, concept and working with the MEF on the Legato and Sonata and all the stuff they're doing.
Yeah,
but if you talk to our internal developers, they will still say, gosh, it takes so long to get anything done in MEF. Do we really have to run this business by committee, by proxy, by a standards body that's going to, send in? Because my view is, yes, we must.
Yes.
Because sooner or later, we're going to have to flip the switch, right? Same as when we were early on, we didn't have MEF Ethernet. We grew into MEF Ethernet, and we matured with MEF Ethernet, and then we became a better Ethernet company as a result of that. And I think similarly that will happen for our APIs. You're going to have a market of standards. If we really imagine the reality, if we interconnect with Telecom Italia and we want to call services on each other's network, standards is going to be the only way to achieve that. But I think if you want to get into the business quickly and learn the mistakes from the labs or where the opportunities are in the labs, you probably need to start building, well, at least my advice would be to start now with getting the right skill set that's coding and making, even internally, and roll into the standards-based model when you're ready.
Yeah, definitely. But it's a nice problem to have if you're holding your dev team back, right, George?
Yeah, you don't want to hold them back because they will be driving you tomorrow.
Absolutely. Shanda, your views on the standards from a more sort of agnostic perspective?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, when we started now 7 years ago, we looked at NFV, or VNFs as they were called then, and they just flipped the acronym, because it allowed us to be hardware agnostic and still get a good network core service that allowed us to be competitive. What was there was software was allowing us to be hardware agnostic. Now it's sort of switched back the other way, where the hardware is software agnostic. So you can buy a piece of standard white box switching, and you can run multiple platforms on it. And some vendors have gone even further and allow you to run multiple platforms simultaneously on that. So I think it is getting more open, but there's a lot of work to be done in terms of standardizing it. Even earlier on, you discussed the disaggregated model. Still today, each vendor has their own version of disaggregation, right? Some are doing it on the box, some are doing it next to the box, some are doing it anywhere you want. And I think that's making the adoption, at least down at the enterprise level and the smaller telcos, much harder to do, right? Which one do you go with? And you still have the big vendors trying to push the old technology or the old technology with new software.
Right.
Which is not really going to help standardization in the long run.
So there's the standardization at the software level in terms of the API. There's then a standardization at the best practice level you're describing, which is needed. That's a good angle. Daniel, your thoughts?
Yeah, I follow George in the pioneering in MEF. Sparkle has been a long-term contributor. We have got growing our carrier Ethernet business thanks to the certification. As a matter of fact, we were, I think, the second carrier that got the 100 giga carrier Ethernet 2.0 certified. Standards, I think, is of paramount importance in this process of continuous transformation. When you speak about standard and about API standard, you need to take into consideration for sure the East-West, because as a matter of fact, we cannot survive alone. We need to create ecosystems of carriers, of service providers that will collaborate and cooperate themselves. Because again, we need to reach capillarities of network that would require huge investment if we need to bear it alone. And there is really no returning point if we go for this route. While in a sane commercial ecosystem model with the standardized API and reference point for quoting, ordering, feasibility, implementation of connectivity services, we can definitely get the bigger cake that the enterprise market is going to produce in the next few years. So this is, let's say, getting standard on the horizontal way. I still would like to believe that in the north-south, meaning within the service provider, there is still room to grow. We are quite active also there in MEF on the, let's say, Presto and Adagio part. I do agree with George that when you want to control your own infrastructure, it doesn't matter which kind of method you use. But when you want to start to have your infrastructure talking with the, let's call it OSS and BSS, despite I started despising this terminology because it's recalling the past. And we need to get rid of
What
this
terminology would you use now? LSO more as an umbrella? Or?
We are working on LSO in lab. We are trying to implement something for the bandwidth on demand.
Okay.
But still we are OSS and BSS slaves, yes. Let's call it like this. So why it's important for me the north-south standardization? Because I want to get the freedom of replacing in 2 years one software component, being sure that whatever I choose, if it is compliant to the north-south standard, I can replace without pains, without entering 2 years integration works, millions of euros of bucks of money spent, and thousands of hours of work just to replace a piece of software. We need to move out from this concept.
Yeah, absolutely. Because everyone has their own version of standards in the software industry, let alone in telecoms.
Yeah.
You talked there about the hated terms OSS, BSS, but that is a massive challenge in terms of integration. Shandor, you don't have that. George, less so actually as well in terms of having newer, less legacy platform out there. What's your perspective on the automation challenge, Shandor, with legacy systems?
Yeah, well, you've rightly said we luckily don't have that problem. And some of the SDN vendors who've come up from the ground up, let's say, as pure SDN, they've come to market maybe in the last 12 months. They've built their platform completely SDN from start to finish, have been able to integrate those functions, those that did exist in OSS, BSS, actually into the platform. And what that's enabled them to do is hand off as a white label or a basis where we can access those features and use it as our own. So we don't have to worry about integrating it into our own OSS or BSS. We can actually just use their platform end to end and get all the functionality that we would as a larger telco who spent years and years integrating these kind of things, because they built it from the ground software up without having all the legacy issues to deal with. And we can leverage that, and we do. And that keeps us competitive, right? And get to market quickly.
Much quicker to consume and implement that as well.
Oh, literally some of the guys we work with, it's less than a minute.
Yeah.
Less than a minute to do things, yeah.
Wow, okay. George, your thoughts?
Strangely, the project we're most engaged in 2019 is a substantial overhaul of our BSS OSS.
Okay.
Because you can grow to a certain point, but you can't scale.
Yeah.
And you impact the customer experience, so how do you make sure that you're able to do just-in-time delivery, on-demand automation, your billing accuracy, your service management, service creation. So we've had older systems, but now we're using more cloud-based. Also, there's a lot of innovation in that space. So there's a lot of partners that can help you with all the adapters for the old stuff and stuff you need going forward. And frankly, that's where we spent, for 2019 at least, most investment this year is going into operational system upgrades. Because we were quite active in the last 2 years in physical infrastructure build and fiber and so. That's more the easier bit, I would say. The OSS, BSS is the real challenge because we need to make sure we don't become a legacy before we've even built the future business, but recognizing mistakes from our own past, lack of a proper system at the forefront means you get to a certain point and then you just collapse.
And is that a rip and replace for you, or is that
it's a rip and rip? Well, we're not integrating anything that's not on the SDN platform. So all our older SDH cross connects and Ethernets and stuff, we're just leaving that. We're just closing the book on that and say, well, we run it and it's still there and it's more of a legacy, and if customer wants to enjoy maybe more premium services that we can build on that network, we'll do that still manually. But we're pushing the drive that's very more customer driven, partner driven, and Infinity, we're investing in the right kind of OSS for that. We're not going to marry the two, since we see the rate of change on legacy networks so rapid that in 2 or 3 years it doesn't become it's not a talking point.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've mentioned something that I think is absolutely key twice there, which is partnerships. What are you seeing in terms of good partner activity and behavior in the sort of SDN ecosystem, to use your phrase, Daniel?
I mean, that's on the marketing side of the business, that's been the most exciting,
Yeah.
I suppose, possibility created by the SDN. Because in the past, customers would come to us, they'd know our product set, and that's what it was. But that conversation has evolved. In the past, you had 3 distinct segments of the industry. You had data centers, you had network companies, and you had vendors. And every one of them was different, and every one of them was very clear what they did. A data center provided you rack and power, a vendor provided you your technology stack, and you built a sort of network system around it.
That's all blurred now.
But
yeah.
today, everyone's got their hands in each other's pockets. The data center guys are becoming network, the software-defined network companies, and my favorite saying on that one is always look under the hood. Because in SDN, they're not all born alike.
Absolutely.
Right, so you work that out. Who's got their technical strengths and weaknesses? Can they scale? Can they not? Are they built as a service provider platform or not? And network companies, what are they transforming to be? And so partnerships are created because, let's for example, platform services, for us at least in Epsilon, some of the most exciting projects have been with data center companies that have come to us and said, look, you've been a loyal customer for years, and we need to have a better connected product. So we can position SDN in a white label format. They have a better connected product, and so we coexist.
Okay.
So that's one. The other one is managed service partners, who traditionally would have been very beholden to a telco or a large global carrier. But now they're getting smarter. They're getting more aware about how the internet really works and how networks really function. And so they're enjoying benefits of an SDN. So that becomes our partner to the enterprise. And in some cases, there's the enterprise itself. Large. So what we find is we don't need to totally reinvent the wheel. We can go to enterprise without having to touch the enterprise directly by working with our partners. And that's a big part of our sort of growth ambition, is growing more quickly through partners. And for example, the other thing that happened last year that we've never really had in Epsilon is the birth of revenue share models. How much of your estate can you contribute? How much of our services can we contribute? How do we jointly go to market, and how do we get product rolled out and enjoy the benefits both ways? So those 2 things are probably driving our business from the marketing angle at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's good. And who's partnering well from your perspective? Who are you seeing doing a really good job of partnering in the market and being historically less parochial than many of the hardware, many of the software vendors have been in the past?
I think Twilio partners very well.
Yeah.
If you have a good technical vision, they don't... Well, I'll tell you this way. I think the UCaaS companies are great examples of partnering. And I think some of the SaaS companies, like fintech companies and application born in the cloud companies, because their whole MO is to create really advanced customer experience in the cloud. So all their investment goes into software. And all of a sudden they have a performance problem. And they realize the customer, you can't deliver the service, you've got quality experience problems. And they say, right, we don't have investment to build a network because our stock price is driven by the fact we're a software company, a SaaS. But they need a network. So we find that is an interesting form of collaboration. UCaaS, SaaS, and born in the cloud companies need API-based SDNs, right, to provide robust backbone. That's one. I think SDNs and data centers are an interesting marriage going forward.
Absolutely.
Because many data centers all over the place now. Frankly, for the hyperscalers, it's a pure numbers game. But for someone who's running a retail colo enterprise product, he's got to have a better connected product. So bring in an SDN and work with that. So for us, those are sort of 2 prominent examples I probably come to mind.
Thank you.
Right now.
Shanda, your thoughts?
Yeah, in terms of partnership, I mean, by partnering with SDN network suppliers, we're able to scale our business much quicker than we were before. So partnership is absolutely key, and we'll continue to look at existing and new SDN providers as they come to market, and even as they go through their life cycle of improving their SDN product. I mean, there are some really great platforms out there. There are some really, as George alluded to earlier, you need to look under the hood of a lot of these to make sure it's not just a little bit of orchestration on top of a legacy network and not going to give you what you need. Not necessarily in terms of partnership, but in terms of growing the market, AT&T have done a lot of good work in basically opening up what they want to do, which has helps everyone else, right, move towards a standard, which is good. We will continue to look at partners. Who's partnering well? I have to echo what George has said. The data centers and the SDN network providers is where the growth is going to be, for sure. I think the key is and it depends on who the organizations are, but keeping that as agnostic as possible and open as possible. As soon as we start closing down some of these ecosystems, it becomes limiting to who can actually get access to it and what they can do with it.
Yeah,
so I'd look forward to seeing that continue to grow. I mean, it's grown massively, but seeing that grow even further. And the other thing that's very well in partnerships, some platforms are moving beyond just connectivity and adding other functions, right? So you can do routing functions, security functions, you can ingress and egress across the internet without having to actually implement anything new on the platform. So that's also something that's really, really growing well.
Yeah, I agree. And Daniel, your perspective?
Yeah, I totally agree with both. If I can just complement, I can say that partnership works very well in the virtual network function space, as well as in the software as a service. Again, George was touching a very important point. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Telcos in the past years were struggling to try to provide software services that were really not their core, that were really not their specialties. So as telco engineering responsible, I am learning to take care about the fabric, meaning what I can produce and contribute to the company, but I'm learning to use the shop, meaning if there is somebody that is doing something far better than I could do and with the fair price and in a much slower time, why should I care? I buy, I integrate, I create a partnership with this guy. At the end of the day, if we want to target an enterprise ecosystem, the enterprise does not care if you are providing a virtual firewall by Fortinet or Checkpoint or anybody else. The enterprise wants a solution, a managed solution. And we are the front end. We, telcos, service providers, are the front end to provide this solution. So the better we partner with those subjects in the virtual network space or in the software as a service, the better we integrate those solutions with what we can provide as core service, the better we can serve the enterprise and the more money we can do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But you've all mentioned in different forms that obviously the hardware and software world's coming together. One area that's very true is obviously the edge of the network. With SDN, we often spend all our time talking about the core, automation, standardization, etc. I'd love your perspective on what's going on at the edge and what's some of the innovation that you're seeing in the edge, both from software vendors and some of the more historical legacy hardware players, and some of the innovation that you've seen last year and you're seeing coming to the market this year. George, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, some projects we've been part of, contributing to, is actually around the internet exchange area. Today these are very large infrastructures that are, developed in core locations. Take London, Paris, Frankfurt, core interconnection. Everybody interconnects there. But what about the rural, underserved communities? In the US they have an initiative now, Connected Nation. And Connected Nation is about propagating internet, making it ubiquitous so that even rural towns and small hamlets have access to high quality internet for the schools, for the healthcare, for all the other things. And how do you get that? How will you connect all these people? And today they might be buying legacy telecom product, on cable, on fiber, on transit, on the sort of model, the Internet 1.0, if you like. But they will need to become better connected. And so we're seeing now a number of companies virtualizing internet exchange. That literally can sit on a small server that run in an application that can be pushed out into a small town. It can be connected to a fiber, connected to the back end, where maybe there's some small content or application servers located there. And that community can enjoy much better connected internet and application performance there, with all the technology available between syncing up between the cloud and the edge. That we're seeing is really interesting. Yeah. And when you think about that, it's about scale. Because you're not doing one village at a time. You might be doing 100 villages at a time or 200 villages at a time. And so that's something we're watching very carefully. We don't have an internet exchange product, but we do carry a lot of traffic to internet exchanges. And we're seeing that their future plans are driven about how to create more ubiquity and pushing internet closer to the edge. And that's at least one example.
And content's really going to drive that, local content exactly. As well, definitely. Yeah. Okay, that's a great observation. Thank you. Shandor.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's definitely a big push to get content closer to the edge. but there's also still a need to get the end user to the edge. And that's where SD-WAN has played a big role in the last 12 months, I say. It's no longer just, I think when SD-WAN first came onto the market, software-defined WAN, people were thinking, oh, well, this is just a way to lower costs. I think that thought's completely gone, and that's correct. It's a better way of connecting and being able to manage, have visibility, and monitor what you're doing, regardless of the underlay. It's not about replacing MPLS with internet or with LTE. It's in most cases about using all three, getting to the edge, being able to do automated failover, automated rerouting, and still have your business up and running, which is not possible when you're using just traditional technologies.
Agreed. Daniel?
Yeah, I do agree. I do agree there is the need to push content and internet closer to the customer prem. Probably there is also the need to take data a little bit far from the customer prem, but not too far. That's why edge can represent the next frontier of cloud, especially if you take into consideration regulations, GDPR or something like that, data locality. That's becoming a massive issue in the localization of specific data. I take into consideration medical data, insurance, banking, whatever else. Still data that the end customer would like really to get rid from its premise because it means maintaining an internal data center. Though small, but it's still taking space, computing, electricity, and also management. And this is a cost. So if you can address the need of such customers that needs to remotize, and to remotize not in a central data center that is located anywhere in the cloud, but at the edge, close to the customer prem, in a place that can be theoretically visited and audited. So then you can think of engineering a solution that takes into consideration SD-WAN, takes into consideration pushing internet content, takes into consideration maybe a scalable hyper-convergent infrastructure on which you can provide computing, on which you can provide storage, and on which you can provide different way of running virtual network functions. And when I say different ways, is because I'm thinking to the next stage of network function virtualization, what I like to call network function cloudification. Up to today, VNFs are simply fat virtual machines with operating system, data layer, everything plus the real virtual network function. This is not an efficient way of providing the service to the customer. And if you think that still SD-WAN proposition and universal CPE's proposition are based on these fat VNFs that needs to run in customer prem, well, this is not really where we want to go. What we want really to do is to create VNF that are cloud native, so that the VNF is simply a function that you can containerize within a Docker or Kubernetes container, where only a small piece of the VNF can be pushed down to the customer prem, reducing enormously the footprint of the universal CPE. But then other small pieces of the decoupled network function will run at the edge in that computing platform that I spoke before.
Definitely, that makes sense. We're out of time now, but let me give you one final thought, prediction, something for the audience for 2019. What would that be, George, if I can hand to you?
I think, now is the time, if you're not already on a journey, to be on a journey of transformation and change. I think it starts with what your outcomes, business outcomes are intended to be, what your future plans are, which markets you're addressing, and use the technology benefits available today. Difficult as it is, the pains are there, both operational, financial, and right across the company. But so it's a survival game now. It is not a question of, should we, shouldn't we, can we stick to conventions? The cloud is moving at such a pace. The innovation is happening. We as an industry are not getting any younger, by the way, so we can take inspiration from the fact that our teenagers and they collaborate and use the internet in ways which we can't even imagine. This is the future, and now is the time to really reimagine, rebuild, recreate, the companies for tomorrow. If you're not on a transformation journey, you should be probably very afraid at this point.
Yeah, agreed. So transformation, cloudification. Shandor.
My prediction is that the lines will continue to blur between cloud providers and network providers. I mean, the pace of cloud growth and the rate of development, they have massive networks already in the ground. They already do things around passing traffic across their own networks. It's not a far step for them to start offering edge-to-edge network services or even ingressing and egressing traffic to their network. So I see that getting blurrier. I'm not sure how that will play out. But again, the key will be partnership, right? If you don't see it as a threat and rather as an opportunity, then there's definitely room to develop that as well.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. Daniel.
Well, I agree with George. It's a survivability game. In order to survive, we need to learn how to decouple our infrastructure from the service that we provide and expose. We need to learn to be OTTs of ourselves, of our same infrastructure. To do this, as I said, we need to start to understand what's the meaning of competing within an ecosystem of partners.
That's good. Thank you. Panelists, Daniel, Shandor, George, thank you very much for your time. Audience, thanks for your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you.